Alrighty, so welcome. If you are watching this in real time to our continuation of our lesson on the SAT reading section on the overall approach to it, and today we're going to be going through some actual questions. And how you doing today, Patrick?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm excited that we get to keep on this first practice test, the first passage. We've probably seen it many times, but it's a good starting point, and I'm looking forward to getting to answer the questions, which we didn't get to last time. So it'll be exciting today.
Oh yeah, definitely. And there's a lot of great stuff to sink our teeth into. It's on the reading, it's a little different than in math, where you have so many different things to get to know. At this point, we're around 200 things you would need to know to be good in the math, right? And in the English grammar side, we're talking about something in the range of about 30 things that you want to be good at. But about 10 that you really, really want to be good at. But then in the reading, there are just a couple of approaches, but it's more about refining those and seeing them in practice. So if we'll go ahead and jump right in, let's go ahead and recap what we did last time with the SAT reading section. We just did an overall approach to it. You can look through our previous lessons on our YouTube and Facebook accounts. If you want to see a more in-depth explanation of the general how to approach the readings, in this moment now, we're going to kind of breeze through it a little more quickly. If you're joining us for the first time, then you'll be seeing it for the first time right now. So how to approach the SAT reading section. We talked about most people would logically want to read very in-depth from the beginning with a feeling like they're recording the information in their mind to be able to remember it later. And a lot of tutors will suggest to students to read the questions before starting and prepare a whole complex approach before you read the passage, so almost like prime yourself for the passage. But we believe that that is sort of too difficult, too complicated, too much stuff. You know, the SAT is definitely giving us really difficult, high-level material, so we don't want to add anything to that. We want to make our lives easier and more simple. So we say read a passage in around 60 seconds, give it a quick first read. And anyone who's already practiced the SAT knows that that is a tall order because it's a very complicated passage. But all you're looking for is the primary purpose. You want to Airbnb it, which is the idea that, you know, if you rent a new house, you know, when you first unlock the door, you're just going to go see where everything is. You're not going to get too in-depth in your analysis of the house when you just walk through the door, haven't even brought in your luggage yet. And that's kind of the approach you want to take to the reading. If you do a lot of work in the beginning, which, like we said, is a lot of people's natural inclination, it's like preparing for 100 possible questions, and you're only going to be asked 10 questions or so, so it doesn't make sense at that point. Why does this work? Because the SAT reading section's extremely evidence-based, so you do have to break out your microscope for every question. So there's not enough time and or emotional energy to be very detailed in your general first read and to be detailed in the way you read questions. You can't do them both. So you have to be that way when you read the questions, which means you have to take a little off in the beginning stages. And also, we just know from doing so much of this that you should never answer any question ever, ever, ever without physically seeing the evidence for that question at that moment. This is what the SAT reading section is about. So you're always going to be up against your own laziness. We all are inherently lazy to some degree. And you have to be fighting that. And it's just something to get used to, a nice sort of best practice to establish for yourself. Yeah, so just like we said, you can't do everything, so you have to make a good decision. But by the way, when in teaching students for so many years to be a little faster and a little more efficient, we've actually discovered that faster is better. So it's not like we're sacrificing anything to be faster. A lot of times faster will actually help you because you're getting the main idea. You can only get the main idea or tiny meticulous details at any one moment. You can't get them both. So a lot of the time, it's going to be more advantageous to the student to just get the main idea, especially in the beginning. So what is it we really do? We say, don't read every single word. Trust your unconscious ability to process the words that you're not enunciating in your inner monologue. So look at our previous lessons for more detail on that. But we've been reading since we were kids, and we need to really believe that our minds are kind of reading even when we don't sort of consciously do it. And we'll model a lot of this as we go. Focus your energy on verbs. Verbs are like the neon signs that tell you what's most important in what you're reading. So, these particular verbs are the most important: is, was, are, am, were, be, have, has, had. So if you're reading through a passage, you'll notice that most of the sentences are to the effect of, this is what's important, this was what happened, we were at this place when this thing happened, and we had these results. So they're the most common verbs that you're going to see and the easiest to ignore. And also, if we need to be experts on verbs, then we need to know what are not verbs. So ing words like running, punching, and jumping. Run, punch, jump are verbs, but running, punching, and jumping surprisingly are not. And to do words, to run, to punch, to jump would not be verbs as well. So I might say, I like blueberries, or I like running, or I like to run. So blueberries and running and to run are all in the same part of the sentence. They function as nouns. So a little more about how this works. When you first approach an SAT reading passage, you're going to come out with a very superficial understanding of it. You just want to know what's the main thing they're saying, and you want to re-speed read in response to each question you see. So what happens when you do this is every time you do this, you're becoming more and more of an expert. And so there are going to be some questions that in the beginning, you're not quite ready to answer those questions yet. What we've noticed is when you're sort of reading for a purpose, when you're reading in order to answer a question, it seems like you're using a different part of your brain. It's purpose-based reading. You're processing the things that you don't want. In order to say to yourself, I don't really need this right now, you've just processed it, which is totally more effective than if I just say randomly read this and just randomly make sense of it. And as you keep going, you'll become more of an expert. So you need to be able to skip questions that you're not quite ready for yet. The SAT is going to give you a lot of the main idea questions in the beginning, a lot of the more difficult questions in the beginning at the moment where you're not an expert yet. So be willing to go with the flow, be willing to say, I don't know this just yet. I'm not at that point yet. In our last lesson, we compared it to getting to know a person. If your future best friend is out there somewhere and you meet that person at a party, they're not going to be your best friend immediately. You're going to kind of have to get to know them little by little. And so what we're trying to do is embrace sort of that incremental familiarity that you're going to develop and have you answer the toughest questions at the moment where that familiarity is fully developed. So that was 20 times faster than how we explained it last time, right, Patrick?
That was pretty quick.
Anything to add before we get into it?
No, I think just to maybe sum up quickly, quick first read. The passages are all pretty high level stuff, so you can take many hours to read them. Unfortunately, on this test, you don't have that much time. So quick first read, get to the questions, detail specific questions. You can start with those. Those ones tend to point you to the parts of the text where your answer may be found. Maybe not on that line, but around those lines. And then, as you mentioned, for the more main idea ones, after you've speed read the passage a few times, then the main idea questions will be a bit easier for you because you're more familiar with the passage. So in big terms, that's what I would say.
Okay, awesome. And we're going to go ahead and look at College Board's Practice Test 1, which is available for free on the College Board website, and I also believe on the Khan Academy website. And so let's go ahead and get into that now. In our last session, we read through this passage, sort of modeling that faster reading style. And I'll just kind of do it for one of the paragraphs here, so I'm not boring you with me reading out loud. But once again, if you really want to follow along with us and you really want to get the most out of this, you want to get your hands on College Board Practice Test 1, which is available for free through the College Board website. And if you're not watching this in real time, if you're watching after the fact, what you could do is pause before you hear our explanation of any of these questions. Pause the video, try to answer it yourself, and then go ahead and look at our explanation for either, what is the right answer, which you can also get through their answer key, but more important, why is the right answer the right answer? So just kind of reading out loud here. Because we're modeling the idea of not reading every single word. So I'm just going to go ahead and look at this part that I'm circling in green here. So where did you meet such a fellow? Imagine he thinks he can marry this heir and take her to America with a snap of his fingers. She waited for laughter. Naomi was silent. She stood a half minute looking into her eyes. Finally, she spoke. I met him at my literary meeting. Naomi churned and stopped. Mother, yes, I mean to have him. So just the idea is, you know, that there's death in reading every single word because we're not processing. So it's kind of what we discovered, that as you're making those judgment calls of which words are the most important, you're using that other part of your brain that we talked about before, which is the idea of processing what you're doing and making decisions about what you're doing, and allowing this to go more into sort of your permanent memory as you're doing it. So let's go ahead and look at the first question, just splitting my screen here so that we can be able to have the question on one side and the passage on the other.
And then also,
Yep.
if I may, Alex, just for people that are watching, when you highlighted it, was that for the viewers to see what they should be reading, or do you suggest that when people are doing the test, they make a note of certain words and of certain phrases? Should they be underlining also? Should they be doing the same highlighting? Just
Wonderful question. Wonderful question. I would say that highlighting fits into that other approach of what a lot of other tutors and tutoring companies recommend, which is sort of more in line with the idea of deeply reading at first. I've definitely seen other tutors sort of say, hey, when you first encounter these types of passages, underline as you go. And it's kind of that overbearing approach of trying too hard in the beginning. I probably wasn't doing it exactly lined up with what I said verbally, but the idea of what I was doing was emphasizing the fact that we're letting our inner monologue as we're reading focus on certain words or others. So we're not reading from beginning to end. We're reading from more important to less important, and we're really believing that we can at any moment go back and reread, and we plan on doing that. So because we're going to be getting deeper and deeper into this now, we're not putting that pressure on ourselves to get deep into it right now. So wonderful question, Patrick. I appreciate it. So which choice describes what happens in the passage? If I were seeing this for the first time, I would leave this question for later, because it's kind of asking for sort of the main idea of everything that's going on here. Assuming that we're not overly familiar yet, but for the purpose of the lesson that we're doing, I'm going to go ahead and go through it right now, because otherwise we'll be doing our sort of podcast all out of order as well. So looking through the passage, one thing I might emphasize is to always read the introduction to the passage, this part right here. I think it's something that we can all fall victim to, is kind of being a little lazy about reading that part there. And here it says that, we're in Japan, which I think is very important for processing what we're reading here. And also the names, because in this we have Chi, Naomi, and Akira. So we have these kind of foreign names that are kind of hard to follow along with. So here it kind of explains who's who. So Chi is the mom, the daughter is Naomi, which means that Akira is the young man who's asking for the daughter's hand in marriage. So let's see, where do we see signs of what happens in the passage? So let's see, either of us can kind of answer it. By the way, Patrick, do you have your own copy of it open? Because it's probably a little hard to follow along with my screen, right?
Yeah, correct. I don't, but I have a pretty good mind map of this entire passage. So I think I'll be able to point you.
You've taught it a million and one times, I'm sure, right?
Close to, but okay, well, so what I would say to start, main idea question, obviously, we wouldn't maybe do this question first. So we're going to just pretend that we have more knowledge of what is transpiring in this whole text. But I think that sometimes with these questions, the more familiar you are with the text, it's easy to sometimes pinpoint which answers cannot be true. And I think in this instance, there's a couple of answers that are clearly wrong. There's a couple of words that just really don't fit what happened. So I think that could be a good spot to start. If we can rule out one or two answers that are for sure wrong, then we only have to deal with one or two. So for example, here, I would say that C, the reminiscing about choices made over the years, reminiscing, pretty specific. It's a present chat between two different characters for the most part. And over the years, we never really jump back in time. Again, the timeline is always in the present tense. So I would say C is one of those answer choices that I think most students can see is wrong. And then I would say A, if you're reading closely, and if you were going through closely, it says that one character intrudes and argues. And I think that those are pretty strong words also. You want to be careful with the connotation of words here. And again, if you're just interpreting and you weren't reading carefully, or you didn't go back and scan the passage each time, you may think this could be true. However, if you go back and see that the character was not intruding, he was, I believe, in around lines maybe around lines 30 or maybe 20, something like that, he was let into the house, which is the opposite of intruding if you're let into a house. So I think those are two answers that are pretty obviously wrong if you read carefully at the relevant portions.
Alrighty, and I am fighting with my computer screen to get everything displayed correctly. But yeah, let's go ahead and, we want to follow our own rule here. So let's go ahead and get our eyes on the place where the mom invited Akira in, and that would be right here in line 37. In line 37, she says, come inside. So based on line 37, we're getting rid of answer choice A there. So now we're down to B and D. Was it a character receiving a surprising request from another character, or was it someone criticizing another character? I would say, definitely a huge emphasis in the way we teach this on answering in your own words first. The writers of the SAT are just masters at writing these tempting answer choices that can kind of lure us in the wrong direction. And the way around that is for you, the reader, to be in control, and the answer choices come to you. So you got to know what the right answer is. So what happens in this passage is that a guy proposes to the girl that he loves through the mother. He breaks tradition, which somewhere in the passage they mentioned that the proper tradition in Japan at that time was to use a go-between. But because he had a job offer, he had to kind of do it in a rushed manner, and it ends up offending the mom at the very end of everything. So he's proposing, which, okay, we want to, like I said, not break our own rule, and we want to go ahead and get our eyes on where we're seeing it. So right here, he says, I don't want to trouble you in line 39. I would approach you more properly, but I have a job position. And then later in the passage here on the next page, he says, depending on your response, I may stay in Japan. So don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. And I asked directly because of using a go-between takes time. So right there, we're seeing that this is a proposal and that he didn't use the go-between that was characteristic at that time, in that culture at that time. So then that's going to be B. He's receiving a surprising request from another character. Anything to add, Patrick?
No, that's perfect. And also just the fact that even when he says he has a job offer, but the whole time he's trying to hint at what he's going to ask, but she just has no idea. So it's a surprise to her, which is the other part of this answer that also needs to be supported by a text, which is just the fact that she has no idea why he could be there and what he's going to ask of her.
Yeah, and we see more of the surprise at the very end because she tells her daughter, where did you meet such a fellow? Imagine that. He thinks he can just snap his fingers and take her to America. And notice that I'm not reading word for word. It's very important to be constantly doing that, because we need to really be understanding this rather than just, it's so easy to just follow the words one by one and just have no idea what you're reading, which is, the kind of one of the kisses of death for us. So right there, she's expressing surprise at what she just heard and disapproval as well. So let's go ahead and go straight to number 2 now, the developmental pattern of the passage. This is another one that would be kind of hard to sort of do at that, introductory moment when you're first seeing a passage. So let's kind of take another look here. So this is sort of me doing my re-speed reading, if you will, sort of a phrase we coined on the fly the other day. But he came breaking tradition. He came on a winter's eve. She, the mom, was reluctant to go to her guests and answer the door. She's saying to herself, who could it be knocking at my door? He introduces himself, and she recognized the name. I think you should go, she said. So there's kind of that the disapproval, like, why are you knocking on my door so late at night? And he says, madam, forgive my disruption, but it's a matter of urgency. So it's kind of telling the story as, just this interaction in a doorway here. Anything to add yet, Patrick?
Well, I think it's good up to this point. Nothing yet.
Okay, so what we just saw is sort of it's sort of just telling the story of two people at the entrance of a house. And like we already mentioned before, what he ends up asking is for a proposal for his girlfriend's hand in marriage. So now we can go through the answer choices. Is this an analysis of a practice? We're not analyzing anything. Is it depicting a meaningful encounter? I would say yes. Is it giving a response to a series of questions? One thing I say to a lot of my students is just imagine, what would that sound like? What would an essay sound like if it were a definitive response to a series of questions? Just kind of make up a little sample essay like that in your head, just enough for you to say, well, that's not what's going on here. And a cheerful recounting of an amusing anecdote. So right there we have the words cheerful and amusing, which is not what this is. This is in fact quite painful to know that this, I'm sure he's a handsome young dentist, and he's getting churned down for his girlfriend's hand in marriage. So nothing cheerful about that. So we're landing on B. Anything to add there?
No, I think it's very well said.
Perfect. So we'll kind of move forward in the interest of covering more material here. So now we're getting to question number 3, and something that we haven't mentioned yet. When you have a question on what we refer to as passage-based vocab. Now keep in mind, the emphasis in the design of the modern SAT is not to quiz you on vocab. In fact, College Board was kind of saying that those days are over, because the idea of quizzing vocab is sort of culturally, economically biased, right? So we're not supposed to necessarily know every word, and we are supposed to be really comfortable with words we don't know. But what we've had a lot of success with when it comes to passage-based vocab is having students ask themselves, what's the momentary main idea? Because if they're asking you to define a word in context, what they're basically quizzing you on is whether you understand that context. And after you ask yourself, what's the momentary main idea, and answer that in your own words, you can usually invent your own word to substitute for the words in question. And when you go through this process, you'll kind of notice that after that, you'll kind of be all set up to answer the question on your own. Anything to add yet, Patrick?
No, I think that's a good concept. Yeah, that's what I like to tell students too. You don't have to memorize a whole bunch of words. They will use vocab that you may not know the meaning of. However, using the context clues, or as you said, what the momentary main idea is, you'll usually be able to invent your own word for that one place. And then you can obviously cross-check it with what the 4 answer choices are and see whichever fits the best, or if it's the same word that you picked.
Yeah, and in verbal in general, we talk about inventing your own, like answering questions on your own or making up your own word in different situations. And what happens is a lot of times we feel like we're reading, we feel like we're understanding, but we're really kind of just going through the motions. So if I say, well, make up your own word to personify this situation, now you're really forced to understand what you're doing, because you've got to kind of participate in the process a little bit more. So it never hurts to do that. It would be up for debate a little more in the ACT, where time is more of a question. But here on the SAT, 65 minutes to do these questions. So you have a really solid amount of time to get this done. So in line 1 was the idea that he came over directly, he broke all tradition. And then it asks the question, it kind of foreshadows the fact that he's going to be unsuccessful here, and then asks the question, should he have done things differently? So the word directly Right here, they kind of all explain right afterwards. They say it's directly and it's breaking all tradition. So the momentary main idea is the idea that he's breaking all tradition. And going over to line 65, so much writing on my page here. But going over to line 65 here, he's asking directly, and then once again defines it right afterwards, because using a go-between takes time. So the momentary main idea is that he's kind of apologizing for the idea that he broke tradition. So both of the times that we were judging the momentary main idea, it had to do with the idea that he was breaking tradition. And if we were inventing our own word, it's such a straightforward word, right? I asked directly. I might invent my own set of words and say he's asking sort of in person. So when we invent our own words, it doesn't have to be a single word. It just has to capture the situation so that we can make our own judgments. So what answer are we picking based on all this?
C.
So without mediation. So the tradition in Japan at that time was to use what they called a go-between here on line 65. And so he's not using a go-between. He's not using mediation. All right. Pretty good on that one, right?
Very good.
All righty. Okay, number 4. What reaction does Akira most fear from Chi? Now, this would be a harder question outside of the context of the SAT, because just in general, it sounds like they're asking you to really analyze and think kind of deeply. But on the SAT, where the focus is on evidence, it's all evidence-based, where it's also evidence-based, what we need to say to ourselves is there must be a phrase in the passage where a phrase or a sentence where Chi directly says, this is what I'm fearing, right? And off the top of your head, Patrick, do you remember where that is?
Yes, pretty roughly. Well, it's where you have actually, I believe it's already highlighted. It's around 60, the paragraph there. And that's a very good point. Just to add again, if you don't refer back to the text, you can make, reasonable statements in favor of many of these choices if you don't go back to the text. However, as you mentioned, it's based off of what is actually on the paper. And there will indeed be a phrase in so many words where Akira expresses what he would fear. And that's exactly what the correct answer will be. You just want to make sure that you aren't inferring things based off of your memory or your own judgment of the text. Refer back to the evidence, as you mentioned.
Yeah, very much
important.
so. That is the kiss of death. The kiss of death on SAT reading is to just answer based on what you think without getting your eyes on it. So you got to see that evidence every time, because in this situation, you're thinking about a guy asking for a girl's hand in marriage from the parent. So what does he fear? We would be likely to say he fears that the girl's going to reject him, or that he won't marry her, right? But if we get our eyes on the quote, he's saying, please don't judge my candidacy by the unseemliness of this proposal. I asked directly because. So he's afraid of her judging him because he broke tradition. And so now we've answered in our own words. And so what answer does that take us to here?
Well, it will be A.
So she's considering his proposal inappropriate. And so, yeah, that really is one of these situations where it's not exactly how we would have answered it if we were just generally answering. But when we get our eyes on that quote, it matches extremely literally with the quote on lines 63 to 67, roughly. Now, this is a nice habit, in my opinion. As you're sort of writing on your SAT as scratch paper, just jot down the lines that you're thinking of for anything. That way, if, let's say, you sort of lose your train of thought for a brief moment, or anything sort of goes wrong, you already know what lines it is. And by the way, the SAT is going to ask you a lot of times on what lines did you get this information. So if you're jotting down the lines, then you're in a good position to be ready for that kind of question. So we got our information from 63 to 67, and the answer number 4 is going to be A. So let's look at number 5 now. And look, speak of the devil, right?
It's like you knew it was coming.
As if I did. So where are we looking now? We already had it down as like 63 to 67. And so C kind of matches up directly with that. And that's something that we do tell students really often. When you're doing this the right way, you'll end up getting to that evidence question and knowing the answer already most of the time. And on that topic, the $1 million question that always comes up on SAT reading, which is the idea of, should you answer the evidence question first because they're already giving you the 4 quotes? And I answer that question with an emphatic no. Do not do that. Heck no is my answer to that. Because what's happening is, when we talk about speed reading and looking through the passage really fast for every quote every time, what we're doing is we're becoming masters of overarching ideas, of context, of how everything fits together, of primary purpose. So if we take each of these lines, what you're doing is you're taking them out of context and they have no meaning. Like line 33, for instance, means nothing if I don't know what was going on lines 25 to 37. So a nice best practice on SAT would be to just always answer the question first and then go to the evidence question. Anything to add, Patrick?
I would just say sometimes if the students are really stumped on the first question, they've exhausted every other possibility, they've answered every other question, then I would say it's worthwhile looking at the quotes, but not out of context. Obviously read around the quotes, but if you can answer the first question of the pair, you should always. However, as a last ditch effort, if all else fails, maybe read around the quotes, but you're always better off if you understand, as you mentioned, exactly what's going on in the whole passage.
And at that point, it becomes a question of timing, because the one thing that we're really emphasizing a lot of is the idea of being willing to skip questions, anything that's taking too long. You want to bounce off the end, not just on verbal, but also on math. You want to really just get to the end and then come back to all the questions that took a long time. As tutors, we cringe and our eyes well up with tears when we ask for an update on how the SAT or ACT went, and students say, oh, well, I only made it up to this question number in math or in reading. And I mean, we know you can't get your best score when that happens. So if you're in that situation where you have to use the evidence as kind of a clue to kind of like solve the question backwards, then we want that to be the last question you're answering after you've already done all the easy ones, and maybe even after you've gone to the other passages. Because we want to do everything that's quick and easy before we start really, really splitting hairs and really muscling our way through some of the harder questions, right?
Yes.
So, okay, well, that was just the fastest half hour of my life, I believe, and we're keeping these to 30 minutes or less. So, we're gonna pick up with the rest of this reading passage next time. Tomorrow at the same time, we're doing these lessons weekly. Be sure to share with any high schools or any of your fellow students that there's this amazing free resource happening every weekday, and hopefully we'll get a lot of positive feedback, and that will encourage us to keep this wonderful thing going.
Yep. So make sure you tune in tomorrow to get the rest of these answers if you really need them. And yeah, we'll keep on going through the whole week and share it. And if there's any questions or anything, comments, we would love to hear it. And yep, we hope it helps. That's why we're here. Give the resources to everybody.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for joining us. Patrick, great job as always. And have a great day, everybody.
Appreciate it. Same to you. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.